Good morning. Thank you. I'd like to call the Public Budget and Public Employees Committee hearing to order. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderman Oldenburg. Alderwoman Schweitzer. Alderwoman Saunier. Alderman Aldrich.
Aye.
Chair Spencer.
Present.
Alderman Oldenburg.
Present.
Alderwoman Saunier. We have 4 present. We have a quorum.
You weren't taking a vote. Madam Clerk, I'd like to make sure that we mark Alderman Aldrich as present rather than aye today.
I did.
Thank you. All right. With that, first order of business would be to take approval of the minutes from January 31st, 2024. I'll take a motion on the approval of the minutes.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the minutes from January 31st, 2024.
Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Oldenburg. Alderwoman Schweitzer. Alderwoman Saunier. Alderman Aldrich.
Aye.
Chair Spencer.
Aye.
We have 4 aye votes.
Thank you. Okay, as a matter of discussion today, we will be taking up ward capital funds. There are 2 things that were brought up in our deliberations on the floor of the Board of Aldermen on Friday that I'd like to cover here this morning. I'm grateful for the comptroller's office being here, the budget director, and the director of the Board of Public Service to kind of go through these things. The first issue was that of interest on our ward capital funds and making sure that the interest accrued and unspent ward capital funds have been and are continuing to be applied to the specific wards that to which they came from. And the second issue would be projects that were uncompleted and ensuring that those funds continue to stay with the appropriate wards. So with that, I'd like to first bring up the comptroller's office to discuss the interest rates, interest accrued, and the fund for each of the ward capital funds. And if you don't mind, if you could just use the microphone for the folks at home and introduce yourselves. And Madam Clerk, I believe city employees do not need to be sworn in, or do they? I'll take your.
They do not.
No. Okay, thank you.
Jason Fletcher.
Good job.
Yeah, it's.
Oh, there we go. It needs to be green. Okay.
There you go. Thank you.
Jason Fletcher, interim deputy comptroller.
I'm Bev Fitzsimmons. I'm retired part-time deputy comptroller.
Bev, thank you for coming back for us today. Okay. So I believe we've had some discussions over email, and I'm grateful that you're able to kind of explain. The question at hand was really whether or not interest accrued on unspent ward capital kind of continue with each ward account. Can you kind of go through that process for us,
Yeah,
please?
interest has accrued, but I do think it would be best if Bev answers.
Okay.
She has more detail than I can.
Okay.
Okay, so yes, interest has been allotted to the wards. Now, if you look back every year, there are years where you don't see it, and that could be caused by 2 different things. One could be timing. We just didn't get it moved, but the cash would never, the interest wouldn't be like put somewhere else. We accumulate the pooled cash of the interest. We accumulate the interest that's on the pooled cash into one cost center. And then after the audit's done, so usually it's like mid-year. Like right now, we're, probably within this month, we'll be moving the fiscal year 23 money. Okay, so that hasn't been distributed. We know that. We're still trying to get the audit done. Once the audit's done and all the numbers settle down, then we move money. Okay, it's based on all the general pool cash is usually put into one cost center, and then we take that dollar value at June 30, and we appropriate it according to the percentages throughout all the different funding sources. So it's just not your money, it's the use tax money, it's the public safety sales tax, it's the EcoDevo sales tax, it's all those different components that make up, that we distribute the interest to. So your money is actually moved over. Now, has there been times when we didn't move money over for fiscal years? Yes, like I said, one could be timing. And then we would move it, maybe you won't see it one fiscal year, but the next year might be accumulation of 2 fiscal years. The other one would be if there wasn't enough interest earned. There were years when we were hardly making any interest. Our cash flow was low. And you got to remember, it's just not the interest that's earned. There is also banking fees that we have to pay. There's investment consultants we have to pay. There's other pieces that have to come out of that we call contra revenue. So they are offset by the interest. So once the interest is given to your ward, it's there, just like all your taxes. Once the taxes are there that you are allotted by the budget, it's there. We don't take any money out of your cost centers or anything. Now, yes, with the new system, we changed the process of how we do the accounting on it, but it basically works the same way, is that your ward basically has each department that does services for you, and it accumulates it within there according to how you guys appropriate. And the cash stays in there unless you guys move it or you spend it. And that's just basically the forefront of the whole thing, okay? Any questions?
I'd like to turn it over to committee for questions, starting with my vice chair.
Thank you, Beth, for coming. Thank you all. I had asked for this when we passed the ward capital. When I was working with the president's office, I had said that we needed to do a deeper dive into how the ward capital was spent and where the dollars are allocated. And so you said that you had a formula that you went with, and I know the comptroller did send us the formula on how they were analyzing in regards to how my mic is on. Now I lost my train of thought. Right.
Are you talking about just the interest portion?
Right, and so the
okay.
comptroller did send us, how with the new wards, how they would take those dollars and the interest, how it would go into those wards. And so I guess what my biggest issue is, we went from 28 to 14, and I know that she was looking at percentage for each area, how to encompass that into those wards. So that interest will be included in that, correct?
Right. Like I said, I haven't done fiscal year 23 yet. And so what we will do, since the money actually was not moved to the 14 wards, because, thus this board bill you're working on. And so what we'll do is we'll do the calculation with the 28 and do the same percentage that we moved it to the 24 with that particular money. So in other words, if the calculation that we did to take the money and move it to the 14 wards was, we went to planning and urban design, and they gave us a percentage of what the old wards were that went into the new wards. So in other words, Ward 1, I'm just going to use that as an example, and I'm making up numbers, okay? It might have been 25% of the old Ward 14 and 5% of the old ward. So I took each of those pieces and I percentaged it out and gave them that balance that was in there, okay? We'll do the exact same thing with the interest that's earned this year. So the interest will be calculated first into the 28 wards, then broken down into the percentages of the new 14 wards and be given to the 14 wards, okay? So it'll be in two phases this year, but it's still going to get to your 14 wards.
So in the past, has it ever been dollars that were there in those wards? Say I got elected and it was a ward, the older person before me, so it was dollars left there. How do we calculate those dollars to come into the new port?
Okay, so I'll answer that two ways.
Okay.
If the prior alderperson had identified a project, okay, you have a team that works with Rich Bradley that
Right.
we call your ward liaisons, and they should be aware of what those projects are per ward.
Right.
Okay, and they keep a very efficient look at how that goes, right? That the prior alderman said, I want to do a new playground at Tilly's Park, that type of thing. And so it's up to the liaison to work with the alderman to say, do you still want this done? Because in the meantime, they're moving on. They're doing your projects and they're going out and bidding it and they're figuring stuff out, depending on like what department is responsible for that particular project. It could be streets, it could be parks, it could be Board of Public Service. They obviously work mostly with all the construction type things. But, you know, each different reason, you know, you could want trees planted, well, then that's the forestry hand. But it's up to the liaison to work with the alder person to make sure the projects are what they are, especially in transition time. You know, I mean, if the alderman gets reelected, they're on their same wavelength. But if they change their mind, they can do that. They work with the liaison, a transfer is put into ENA, and the money's moved. That's basically it. As far as the interest will be appropriated with the next year's appropriations. If not, it's always calculated. Paul works very closely to make sure that the appropriation and the cash balance out, because what you're getting is the cash that's allotted to you for appropriations, I think, okay?
Okay, so it was a time where the Ward Capital, and it was during the airport time when we were doing the battle with the airport, and so the Ward Capital was held up. Is that correct or incorrect?
I do not remember that.
Okay,
And
I'm
with
just
the
trying.
airport, do you mean when they were trying to do privatization or something else?
Yeah, when it was doing the.
One should not have anything to do with the other.
Sorry?
Okay,
It's a ghost.
okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay, that's what I was just trying to figure out. So moving forward, all formulas will be under the 14 wards.
Right, absolutely.
And so,
It will take a little extra calculation this year, but no problem at all.
is it where the, I guess I'm really getting more confused with this because when they thought this 14 ward, nobody thought this through.
No.
Let's just be real. They just said, oh, this is a great idea. And then they like, oh, we didn't think about all this. So now we're 14 wards. And so some wards are larger than other wards. So would it be a difference in the calculation or?
Based on, we decided to do, I mean, our proposal to the alderman, and I believe you guys agreed, which is this board bill, which is taking it by the area, by the square footage of your ward. So in other words, if Ward 1 is made up of, 4 different wards for each 25%, you got 25% of the money that was at that time unencumbered, but it was probably, the projects were probably proposed, or if they weren't, they go within what we call our contingency. So if you haven't made up your mind, there's a pot of money for that too, right? So as it goes through, then it was given to the area. It wasn't given like, Ward 1, we're just going to take all the money up and divide it by 14. It's according to the people that live there. We felt like the constituents that you have had the right to the money that wasn't previously spent.
Right.
And so that's why this was broken out, and we proposed this.
Alderwoman.
Okay, because I see my chair is antsy, so I'm going to see what she's doing.
What I wanted to do here is focus on the two pieces of the interest rates and then the projects. And then what we'll do is turn it over to some more general ward capital discussions. That way we can try to efficiently address the two main issues that were brought up in the floor on the front end, just to kind of go through those interest accruals, and then the projects. And then I'll turn it over to you, Madam Vice Chair, and we can go through any additional ward capital issues, because I know there are a lot, and we could be here quite literally all day. Ms. Fitzsimmons, Beverly, if you had mentioned on the front end that each of our wards have their own accounts. They get the ward capital, and all the interest and bank fees are associated with each one of those accounts. Am I understanding that correctly?
When you said the bank fees, that's all up on the front end. So really, those things don't actually touch. It just gives me the bottom line number of what I'm distributing throughout all the city's pooled cash.
Okay.
Okay. So it's not that your money's over here and this. It's all the money's pooled together. The treasurer's office does the investing on it. And then, like I said, we have these additional fees from their investments and their bank fees and those type of things that have to be taken into account. And those are offset by the interest that's earned. And then that bottom line of interest is distributed amongst all the different funds that should be getting that.
Based on how much is in each fund. So,
Right.
if, for example,
right.
the
And I
first
do
ward-
it as of June 30.
Okay, thank you. Okay. And the accounting for that, I know Ryan has sent out some information about that to the committee, but if somebody wanted that accounting for the interest accrued each year, so we could clearly see that it was applied. Is that something you provide to the committee if that was
And
requested?
What Ryan gave you, I think, was put together by Paul for me. He had gone into my cash basis reports and just pulled the numbers out. And what you're seeing is you're going to see some blanks there. And like I said, sometimes it's that we
Right.
either didn't have enough to transfer at that point, so we rolled it over. So you're going to see that the balance in the next year's, and it's all going to be combined together.
Right.
Or it was that there wasn't enough interest to transfer at that time. Like I said, think back 4 or 5 years ago when we were making almost nothing. This year, we're fabulous because we have somebody like Christina Bennett in the treasurer's office who is phenomenal with the investments, right? And she's making sure everything, and we have a large cash flow with ARPA and things, you know. I mean, we have a bigger cash flow to go forward, you know.
That's right. I think going back in time over the last 10 years, interest rates have been so low that those types of accounts haven't really accrued much. Paul, before we just round out the full discussion on the interest rates, did you have anything else that you wanted to add? And that way I could put a pin on the interest rates, move on to the project list, and then kind of other award capital issues.
Good morning, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. Yeah, the exhibit they were talking about this is a 5-year history by each ward. I don't know if you want to walk through that, or are you comfortable with it, or you have it before you? But this is simply exhibiting cash on hand at the end of the fiscal year, the taxes that were allocated by each ward, the amount of interest that was allocated by each ward during that fiscal year, and then you get the cash on hand at the end of that fiscal year. And that's a continuum from FY19 to up to the end of FY23. Now, the one thing I did want to point out is FY24, as you see there, the budget included the allocation of our estimated sales tax revenue. Now, looking ahead to FY25, and as you move these other monies into the new accounts, those are going to be have to be appropriated. So that's going to be something that we're going to have to adjust FY25 to do. But you can see it is all allocated by ward in the old 28 ward structure, and then it will be going forward on the 14 ward structure in the course in this fiscal year, and then going forward to FY25.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And so that just with that, we'll turn the discussion over to the committee on interest accrued in each of the board accounts. Madam Vice Chair, did you have any additional questions on that, Paul? Director, okay. Alderwoman Schweitzer. Oh, excuse me, Alderman Oldenburg's on video. Alderman Oldenburg, did you have any questions on the interest?
I did not. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. My questions were answered regarding, why there are some spots that didn't show anything, and you clearly stated that answer. So thank you for being here and taking time out of your busy days to answer our questions.
Alderwoman Saunier.
I don't have any questions. I just really enjoy having this layout of all the specific numbers and all of the, specifically from the 28 wards. I know I kind of got the information of the wards that previously helped make up the 7th ward, but I like getting it to see it this way and just kind of getting a little history lesson on what has happened in the past. So just thank you all for the information.
Alderman Aldridge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee also appreciate the handout. It's interesting to see, even though I wasn't during the 28, how some funds were spent, some was not spent in some wards, large amount not spent in some wards, to be able to use that ward capital for community improvement things. I guess I want to, the reason we're really having this hearing is because of things that was said at the Board of Aldermen last Friday, which I think it's always important to kind of know the facts, and then we had the media reporting it and they're back again. So one thing that was in question came from an article back in 2002 about $4 million of interest money that older people didn't know about. And if you guys can probably remember back to that time, I was in 2nd grade then, but if you remember back to that time, I guess so that we could just have the facts for the floor and when people watching. So apparently there was $4 million of interest that was a surprise to older people back then. Do you know if those funds back in 2004 was put into accounts to make sure that those interest funds actually went to the right accounts?
To be honest with you, I don't remember that. But I can clearly say, once the cash is in there, it would be appropriated. I know Paul and I had worked up a big spreadsheet, and I don't remember if it was back that far or sooner. I have no idea. Time runs together. And so where we make sure what he's appropriating is the estimate of taxes that he's expecting for the next year, plus what he thinks the cash balance is that was not appropriated. So if you would look at your Board Bill 1, you can literally see in there where it'll say taxes, and then the next line will be beginning balance. Sometimes it was a negative because money didn't come in the way it was. Sometimes it was a positive, and that would include the interest, okay? So it's the way Paul is handling it, and I'm talking for you, and I apologize for that.
I can jump in. Yeah. I think each year, and particularly this coming year, given that we're moving these monies from the 28 arrangement to the 14, we're going to have to look at the cash on balance to make sure that we appropriate anything that's no longer appropriated. The capital fund's unique in that, unlike the general fund, which at the end of the fiscal year, you got a new slate, right? In the capital fund, when you've got projects going forward, those appropriations carry forward. So over time, let's say a project expires and that money becomes available, it might be available for reappropriation. Well, that needs to be assessed every once in a while. So I think it's this coming budget, we're going to have to look at, make sure that not only you allocated the sales taxes and such, but that all unappropriated cash is appropriated. So I would expect there's going to be large amounts that will vary by ward. Usually you look at the ward and it's all the same amount, right? But it's going to vary by ward, and that's something we have to be accommodated, particularly next year because of this reallocation.
Gotcha. So at least, we're not going back to 2022, but at least for the last 5 years from the document that you guys provided, clearly shows from Ward 1 to Ward 28 that any interest that was added up went to those alders accounts, at least from this document that shows that interest that was occurred, I was trying to say that word, actually went to the ward capital accounts of those alder people.
Yes.
If I may, Alderman Aldrich, Ryan Coleman, who we should give some props to, Ryan, much for being so involved in helping us organize here today, pointed out that per that article, when that was discovered, there was an ordinance passed by the Board of Aldermen to rectify that. At that time, in those funds, 3.6 million of the 4 were allocated to the wards, and then moving forward, they have been appropriately allocated to each of the ward moving forward. But I think you bringing that up was important because it was a discrepancy and it was a problem before that time, and then it has been rectified.
Gotcha. No, I appreciate that clarification, and I think, like I say, just the facts on it. So after 2002, my next question, but I think you answered it, that in the article it stated that then Mayor Bosley was going to adopt an ordinance requiring the Comptroller's Office to report to alders on a yearly basis all interest accrued on the funds set aside for ward improvement. So that is something that you guys now do.
I don't know, once I do it, that I thought I was supposed to pass it on to you, because if the interest is there, it has to be appropriate. And so the cash is there, and then it's figured out at budget time how much you would be able to allocate.
Correct. And I was just asking, after the issue was found.
No, it's been put in.
It's been rectified since about 2002.
Right.
Correct. Okay.
Can't guarantee that date, but yes, it has been done.
I wasn't watching the YouTube back at the board back then either, so it's okay. I just wanted to, like I said, I think facts are important. I just wanted, especially when people are watching this, know that things seem to be actually in the right direction. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Now moving on to point number 2, which was also brought up on the floor and I guess alluded to, was whether or not projects that were not completed are accounted for moving forward. And I think perhaps we could bring up Richard Bradley from the Board of Public Service to kind of discuss that issue. And it's my understanding that you've done a lot of prep work for us here today.
Good morning. Thank you. So the commentary about projects being accounted for, I would like to tell you that today I have brought an accounting of every single project that was done in 28 wards from 1994 to today. And I'm going to give this all to you at the end of this hearing. So if there's any question about any particular project being signed off on, being built, where the money went, it is in this ledger in front of me. I'd like to just take a second and talk about the process, because I think sometimes people don't remember exactly how the process works. So if I may, I would like to go over that. So at the beginning of, or right near the end of the fiscal year, the budget division provides my ward capital staff with the amounts that go into each of the budgets for that coming calendar year. At that time, my staff puts together a ward capital review time and schedules with each of the alders to come in and to program their money for the upcoming year. Some choose to come, many choose not to. When they come, the idea is to put the funding, plan the funding and put it into the right pots of money, whether it's parks, streets, refuse, BPS, or there's a contingency fund. And so what happens is any money that's not put into a particular budget line for the upcoming year goes into your contingency fund. So when it comes time to build a project, you reach out to BPS, you reach out to your liaison. There are two liaisons, Donna Williams and Andrew Riganti, as well as a program manager, Stephanie Doss, that oversee the program. And you ask them to initiate a project. At that time, they go ahead, they put together the estimate of cost, and then they come back to you and say, do you want to build the project? If the money is already in the right pot, then it's pretty straightforward. You sign off on it, and away we go. It goes to engineering design, then it goes out to bid, and then it goes to construction. And I will get to that process in just a minute. If it is not in the right pot of money, if it's in the contingency fund, then we must process a transfer, which has to go through E&A. And so E&A sometimes could be, depending on when you make the request, it could be weeks, it could be a month, it might be a 2-month period, depending on when E&A meets. But in general, what I want to say about that process is we cannot do anything with your funding, your ward funding, until you approve it, okay? If you want to move it to another ward and help out another alderperson, you need to approve it. If you want to build a project, you need to approve it and sign off on it. An email saying, I want to do a project is not an authorization to get it done. The funding must be approved, and you must be approval of the cost of the project that we provide you. So many times what happens is someone sends an email and they say, I would like to do a project, and we give them information, but we never get a full sign off. And so in those cases, the project actually never takes place. Now, we do follow up, we do ask questions, but if we don't get that sign off, we can't go anywhere forward. Beyond that, quarterly reports are given out that cover all of your funding, every single bit of it that you have. I would tell you that we do not manage the projects in BPS that are under refuge, streets, parks. It's reflected on the quarterly report, but we do not manage them. Those departments do. So the detail that you're going to get from us is going to be 900 BPS projects, construction projects, and so forth. Again, all those are covered in these ledgers. And so I really just feel like, you know, we want to work better with you guys. We want to make sure you understand the process. I know when the new alders came on board, I myself hosted a session where I went down and did a PowerPoint presentation. We can do that anytime that someone does not understand the process. I have no problem with that. You can call your ward liaison at any time. You know, I also want to tell you that from my perspective, I generally do not influence the process. I stay out of it and I let my staff manage the process from cradle to grave. The only time that I get involved in that process is if one of you calls me and says something is taking a long time to do. And does it take a long time to do projects? Yes, it does. It's a very tedious process. It is a check and balance process. It's something that makes sure that everyone's in agreement with the spending of the funds before we do it. And then there's a lot of other things that have to be done, like contract compliance, get all the documentation for that and so forth. And then it goes on to a list to be constructed or it's bid out. Now, you also know that in order to expedite the process, we have done things like hired on-call traffic consultants that we can write task orders for. We don't have to go through a full selection process. We've hired an on-call contractor, your citywide contractor. If those had to go out and be bid each and every time, it would probably add another year to the process easily if we didn't have those vehicles to go by. So we try our best to make the process as good as we can, but sometimes, there are questions, and I would say at that time, just reach out to us and we'll be glad to answer them.
Thank you, Director. All right, I'd like to turn it over to the committee for questions, starting with my Vice Chair, Alderwoman Boyd.
Thank you, Rich, for coming. I guess my question is, I hear what you're saying about I keep hearing process. And so I don't know if the newer audit people understand you have to sign off for the process to move forward. And so when from the time you sign off on that approval of that process, how long does it take to make this go into fruition, to make it happen?
So once you sign off on a project, how long does it take? So that would vary. It would depend on what the project would be. For example, if it was just something very, very simple like sidewalk work, it could take, 3, 4, 5 months to do. If it was something very complicated, like a grant funded project, it could take years to do. It really depends on what size of the project is. And I think what the question I would be asking to your ward liaison when you program it is not only what is the budget, what is the schedule, and how quickly can we get this done? And again, we try to do them as quick as we can, but when there were 28 wards, there was 28 people pulling at us for doing different projects, and the list gets pretty long. I think now that there are 14 alders, what will happen is you'll see that you'll get projects moving a little quicker because there's half of the people that have a list of projects. So it really just depends on what the project size is.
Okay, so I guess the frustration that I have, and I'm speaking for myself, from my personal experience, the frustration that I have is, and to regards to those processes that you're talking about, it doesn't take months. It's taking years for it to come to reality, from the sidewalks to the speed bumps. And you and I have had these conversations. And I'll tell you, I've done everything you asked. I followed protocol and nothing happened. From the Goodfellow project to the sidewalk projects to the speed hump projects, nothing happens. And so the question is, how do you justify that when the person did exactly what you told them to do and nothing happened?
So I don't, you're mentioning speed humps. I would have to look at that individually and say to you, here's when you program the project, here's where it's at right now. My ward liaison should be answering that question to you. With speed humps, I believe we have put in well over 500 speed humps to date. And the last time I looked at the list, I thought we were pretty up to speed on it. What would this seem to me is that maybe they're part of a larger project. And maybe what we're doing is we're waiting till a street gets paved or a design is completed or some right-of-way is acquired. But if it's simply a street hump project, I will look at that for you because I don't understand why it would take years to build speed. It should never be the case.
Okay, and so I want the people that are listening to understand, because it's frustrating to the elected official And then it's frustrating to those residents when they ask you, you know, where are we with this? And then you'll say, well, I moved the money, I did what I was supposed to do. And they'll say, well, that was 2 years ago or 3 years ago. So that's frustration on everybody's piece. And then two, I guess I looked at, and you and I had this conversation. When I first got elected in 2017, I went back to all the projects that the previous alderperson had. And so I'm still asking the questions, well, what happened to these dollars because the projects didn't happen? And you did say I need to look into that, but I did tell the liaison that when I met with him, and I told Stephanie that too. I said, this didn't happen. And so my question is, so where are those dollars?
So everything that you have on your plate should be reflected in that quarterly report that comes out. And if there's any residual funds from anything that was not built, that should be reflected in that report that was not done. Again, I would ask if you would look through these reports and you would see if the specific project that you're asking about is reflected in here. Was it built? Was it the funding allocated for it? Or did the money just go back into transfer available funds? I don't know specifically what those are, but I would like to know so I can look into them for you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Rich, I'm going to echo. I mean, I know we're kind of getting a little bit off topic here, but particularly sidewalk replacement. I have 50-50 sidewalk applicants that are looking 3, 4, 5 years for their replacements. I've got, and that's incredibly frustrating when you have a resident who's willing to participate in paying for public infrastructure and is 5 years out. We had, this happens over and over and over again through my wards, the 20th and now the 8th. And so rectifying that would go a long way in building public trust and building the relationship with the public, who often pays for a good chunk of the public infrastructure that we need in the community to have safe pedestrian walkways. Alderwoman, or
So
Alder.
can I respond to
please
that?
do go ahead.
So
Yeah.
50-50 sidewalk program is actually under the street department. It is not under the Board of Public Service. We do the citywide sidewalk program, which is 100% of your funding. So is that what you're referring to?
Well, there's the way I understand the 50, I appreciate the clarification here. The 50-50, and then there are some of those that go through the citywide contract. So in other words, when you have a big chunk of them, like I've got right now in the 8th ward, it's my understanding that went through the citywide contract. And some of those are 50-50 and some of those are aldermanic requests. And so, it's confusing for the folks on the other end. They don't care if it goes through a citywide contract or they're going to pay their 50%. They just want their sidewalk replaced.
That's correct.
And, some of those are, tree root, they applied for the 50-50. It was determined to be a tree root, so that resident isn't going to pay. The bottom line is it goes through the city of St. Louis, whether it goes through the citywide contract or goes through the street department. It is all sidewalks, and sometimes it takes up to 5. I've seen it take even more than 5 years on occasion. Which is really, really frustrating to be on the back end when you know you've got a trip hazard, when you've got kids, you've got a stroller, you've got a walker or some kind of mobility challenge, and that makes it difficult, to get around.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Alderman Oldenburg, I believe it would be next. Is that right? Yes.
Yeah,
Oldenburg.
I don't.
Okay.
Thanks for being here, Rich. I have no questions. I appreciate all the presentations today. Thank you.
Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you being here and speaking to us and bringing the receipts. So thank you for bringing all that material. I totally hear the questions from my colleagues about how money moves from an alderman's approval to visible on the street. And the steps that it goes through between that can be very confusing and cumbersome to anyone. People who've been doing it for years find it confusing, let alone someone who's one of our constituents just waiting for their speed hump to get finished. So, I think taking the time to break down the process and how everything works is only a good thing and only good for us to do every so often as a check-in. So just in that way, I appreciate you being here. I think to the points that my colleagues have made is that how money moves is confusing. So when you think about the 50/50 sidewalk being run through the streets department, and that pays not only for the 50/50 sidewalks, but also the tree roots will go through that contract unless we pull it to go through the citywide contract. So even if you have tree root damage, you may still be under a 50/50 contract, and that's through streets, and BPS does the citywide contracts, but that might cost more. And it's all really interesting how it all works and the decisions that we make. So I think the conversation that comes up a lot at the board, whether it's where funds come from, we talked about this in the Capital Committee the other day, and Director Payne and I have talked about this. There are so many different funds that projects can be funded through, and there are so many different things that qualify to be used for this fund, but not for this fund. An alderman can pull money here, and it's so. I guess my kind of long story short question is, when we think about how we simplify ward capital, and the process, if you have thoughts now or would like to think about what you think we could do better to make it easier for aldermen to use, for folks to understand, to streamline the length of time projects take. I don't want you to put you on the point now to say fix ward capital, but I do think that having the discussion about, we pass an ordinance here to do a speed hump, and then it takes a year or more. And I tell residents that when I pass an ordinance, that it's about a year from me to pass an ordinance for a speed hump for you to see it on the street, and that is probably conservative. I don't even know if that's hopeful. Sometimes it feels hopeful. But I know that's because it does move to the streets department. We have to put an order in for that speed hump through CityWorks. The streets department goes through and surveys every street, every location, and decides on a location for that speed hump. And then they put the speed humps out to bid. And they might take a certain amount of time, and then the contractor is chosen and it's scheduled, and during every single moment of that time, it is going through signatures from my office, your office, the comptroller's office, the Board of E&A. It moves through the entire city process for a $6,000 speed hump. And so, I think when we think about that and we think about how we provide services to residents, I think our goal at the Board of Aldermen, how do we provide better services more efficiently, and more transparently. So again, don't want to put you on the spot now, but you do this every day, day in, day out. You're an expert. Your thoughts and opinions are incredibly important to this conversation. So maybe that's a conversation for a later time, or if you have anything to share now, I'd certainly love to hear it.
So I'll just make a few observations, if I may. Thank you for the question. So as you know, I've been doing this job since 2009. And so this is an age-old conversation of things take too long and it's too confusing. So I want to start off and I want to say, this is old city government. This is the way the process is written in law, in the charter. And so we don't make the law, we follow the law. So we do the best we can to do everything properly and in a quality manner and most cost effective. And sometimes getting more cost effective takes more time. So let me explain what I mean by that comment. So before, we have added additional contractors to do the work, and it's a very careful balance of how you add contractors, because if you add contractors and there's no work, it's not necessarily fair to them. So if you do large projects or many small projects together, you get economy of scale. So the cost of a speed hump being $6,000, as opposed to if I have 3 or 4 or 5 contractors that could build it for you in 3 weeks' time, and it would cost $10,000. Then the conversation would be, well, why doesn't it cost $6,000? Well, because the quantities in that contract are much lower. So therefore, in order to balance it out. So we're always looking for the best balance we can. Like I said, we have come up with this idea of on-call consultants. I'm sure you're all aware, by Missouri state law, everything that's in the public right-of-way needs to be designed by a licensed professional engineer. I have a number of those on my staff, But when each person is managing in excess of $6 to $8 million worth of work, we do more project management than we actually do engineering. So that's why we hire consultants to come in and do the work. Same thing goes for the street department. We hire contractors to come and do the work because they just don't have the staff to do or the expertise to do some of these other things like speed humps or some of the other things. They're busy paving, just trying to keep up with all the things they're doing. So we've looked at it over the years. I think the idea of the quarterly report, the idea of the word liaisons is to have warm bodies, to have actual reports that you get every three months so that you can literally touch on paper where your projects are. And if they're not detailed enough for you, you need to ask for more detail. And if they're not detailed, then you need to ask me to get you more detail, and I will. I will do the best that I can. And remember something too, that when it comes to contracting, that we don't contract generally outside between November the 15th and April the 15th just because of weather. If you have a day like today or a month like we've had, we get in everything we can. But typically in the contracting world, those do not officially count for calendar days because the weather typically doesn't play into that. So we've looked at a lot of different things. You're correct. There are many different funding sources. Sometimes I have to make myself a play sheet just in order to follow them myself. And I think Paul and Bev would be right in accordance with us. We all talk about these things a lot. I don't know exactly how to make it simpler other than to just continually communicate and educate and make sure that people understand, you know, the word capital funds come from this pot. The general obligation funds come from this pot. Sometimes we mix them if we need a local match share. But again, I think we try very hard to explain to everybody where they come from, and you know, we try very hard to get those projects built as quick as we can. Again, like I said to Alderwoman Boyd, now that there's 14 alders, it'll be a little bit different in my mind as opposed to 28, because now you have 14 people knocking on your door rather than 28. But the question still becomes is, how can we do it better? We'll look into it. We'll discuss it. If you have ideas, I'm certainly open. But we have to follow the laws.
I appreciate that answer. Thank you very much. And I thank you for your time. And I know this conversation's ongoing. And thank you for being here this morning.
You're welcome.
Alderwoman Saunier.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't have any necessarily questions for you. I think one of the things that I'm excited about that the city is doing right now is looking at all of our processes and evaluating their effectiveness. I think, you know, you can hear from many of my colleagues that we have some concerns about just the process for many of these things. It's been quite the challenge to jump in and learn them. And I don't think any of these efficiencies are a result of, you know, for lack of trying or for lack of effort or competency. Your office is always very responsive to me. So are all of the departments. I just think that some of our systems are very antiquated and outdated. And it may be unpopular to say, but I also think that alders are not experts in everything. And I wish that some of these processes were not necessarily set up for the elected official to make the decision, or at least if there was like a clear group of experts who we could go to talk to when we're having an issue, whether it is streets or whether it is whatever. You know, we get tons of requests from constituents, and I always want to figure out what's best, but I'm not an urban planner or, you know, some of these other skill sets that are useful in this case. So I just look forward to us kind of evaluating our process, figuring out how we can lean more on experts and set processes that are universal so that we can avoid some of the things that some of my colleagues also talk about often, and feeling like, you know, certain areas within the city get more attention than others, or even certain neighborhoods within certain wards get more than others. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderwoman Saunier. I'll just add on that, you know, the city of St. Louis could really benefit from investing more in our planning department. We spend a very small amount of our overall budget on planning compared to cities our size, even compared to other cities in the state of Missouri, which are much smaller than us. And when you invest properly in planning and do things, as you were pointing out, in the most professional and I would say recommended way rather than the political way, your city can really be better positioned to grow and serve its constituents. But unfortunately, Rich is not in that position. but it is something we should be keeping in mind, especially as we move forward through the citywide urban, the planning exercise at the planning department, zoning and all that work that we're looking at moving through this next year. So as we do that, it's good to keep in mind. With that, I really appreciate you coming here, Rich. I appreciate your phone call. I know that some unfortunate things were said on the floor of the Board of Aldermen about this process. It was really my pleasure to be able to pull this together, and I'm grateful that our comptroller's office, our budget office, and our Board of Public Service could come on such short notice to clarify some things, answer our questions, and really clear up any misunderstandings or accusations about the process, and really help us feel a lot more comfortable, I would say, in moving forward with the bill before us. With that, I'll look to my committee for any last minute or additional questions on following up. Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the comments of my colleagues a lot. I think it, reminds us that on this side of the table, we're a policy body, that we would be discussing how we could make the processes better. And I really look forward to continuing those discussions with all of you. So thanks for having this hearing.
Thank you. And with that, see if we have any additional items on our agenda. We do not appear to. And with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do I got a second on that?
Previous roll.
Hearing no objections.
Well, we can't do previous roll because Oldenburg
I
wasn't.
believe he's gone.
Yeah, he's gone. Alderman's gone. But
And Sanye wasn't here either.
I don't believe we need a roll call on the adjournment. I hear no objection, so we can consider the committee adjourned. Thank you all for your time today. Okay.